There's a danger, a trap, in which every relationship can fall prey. Because what happens is that instead of being focused on the relationship, we get distracted and hung up on either theological questions or technical questions. Like, for example, in our relationship with God, we can get hung up on the frumkeit. How religious am I? How pious am I? How spiritual am I? It ruins the relationship. Like in a good marriage, instead of being focused on the other person and just being there for that other person, you get really hung up in, am I a good husband? Am I the best husband? Am I really into being a husband? And then you start with the psychological stuff. You know, my father wasn't such a good husband, his father wasn't such a good husband, and you go through all of this thing and you defeat yourself and you ruin the relationship because who cares? So your wife says, can we please go out tonight because I don't want to cook? And you think, I don't know, am I really a good husband? I don't think I'm such a good husband. And now you're all upset with yourself, with her, with marriage, with the world, with God, with presidential election. Everything's upsetting because you're hung up on the wrong thing. And it really destroys the relationship. So in Yiddishkeit, the relationship with God gets so derailed by the question of my own religiosity. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that development. But then there's an even more rare and but still real hang-up, and that is the theology. If God says, I really need you to do this, because if you don't do this, I get upset and we're going to argue and it's going to take thousands of years to repair our relationship. And then people sit around saying, now wait a minute, does he really, no, come on, does he really care? How can he really care? He's infinite, he's perfect. And you start with this theology stuff, which first of all is best left for the theologians, because you can't just be an amateur theologian. So leave it for the experts. There are people who study Hasidus very deeply, and they deal with this question, and it keeps them busy, and that's good. And you can compare this mimer to that mimer, and this statement to that statement. It's fascinating. It's great. But why are you ruining the relationship in the process? So the question, does God really care and does God really need? This is not a theological question. This is ultimate reality. You're doing his mitzvah for him. If that's not true, then skip the theology and let's just quit. So don't lose the relationship because of a theological hair-splitting argument. If you must. The real difficulty lies in the fact that there is nothing that can compel the Creator. That makes perfect sense. Because if something can compel him, then there's a stronger force, then whatever that is really God. So God cannot be compelled by anything, because there is nothing to compel him. Granted. So when you say God needs the mitzvah, does the mitzvah compel him? God needs us to do the mitzvah. Do we compel him? Does creation compel him? Absolutely not. On the other hand, if nothing compels him, why did he create the world? And you can't get around the fact that he created the world. And nobody is going to argue that he created the world indifferently for no particular purpose. So he created the world with a purpose, with an intention. So where is this coming from? If nothing can compel him, and yet he creates the world, so the only real explanation, as much as we can understand it, is that there's some kind of internal combustion. Nothing outside of God can compel him because there is nothing outside of him. So if he wants a mitzvah, it's not the mitzvah compelling him, it's him. Internal combustion. There's something about God that wants Shabbos. Because of God, not because of Shabbos. So on the one hand, he really wants Shabbos. Really, not optional. Which means it's a real need, it has to happen. And on the other hand, he's not compelled. It's internal, self-generated, whatever you want to call it. So since creations don't have that kind of freedom, everything we need, we are compelled by it. It's not like we choose to eat. We have to eat. It controls us. We need to sleep. It controls us. So we have a hard time imagining how God, without being compelled, has a very definite set of wants, of needs. In understanding God and creation, we have two very different sides of the same coin, and the contrast is very important. On the one hand, we are told to understand and appreciate how meaningless the creation is to the Creator. In fact, we are impressed with the creation when looking from above, God creating the world is the least impressive thing possible, because creation is so insignificant. And we don't need any more of an argument and an explanation than the contrast or the distance between finite and infinite. If God is truly infinite, a finite world means absolutely nothing. It makes no impression. Like, for example, compare 10, the number 10, to infinity. It's totally insignificant. Now add one more to the 10, and now it's 11. Has it become more significant in comparison to the infinity? Not at all. How about add another 10? How about add 1,000,000? It makes no impression. It's completely insignificant and will never become significant no matter how much you add to the finite number. So it's important in the service of God to know how distant we are, so that we have an awe and a humility, know our place. We are finite creatures, we are physical creatures. You know, like a chassid once said, I risked my life back in the olden days to break away from my family and my background and my community to start learning Chassidus. And I learned Chassidus, and you know what made it all worthwhile? I realized that part of God's infinite capacity is his ability to tolerate my existence. It's important that we know where we stand. So we know that God fills the world, he transcends the world, and the world means nothing. But in contrast to that, God creates the world. He creates heaven and he creates earth. Heaven does not please him. He doesn't want to give his Torah to the angels. He wants to give it to human beings. And not human beings who are all perfect. Human beings who can violate every commandment that he gives. And we do. And yet that's what he's interested in. So how do we figure this thing out? We are the least significant, maybe totally insignificant creatures, and yet he'll abandon every other world, seemingly more significant, more infinite worlds, and he cares deeply about our world. We have to give a complete picture if you're going to serve God properly. If you say, God is hung up on this world, God created this world, he's invested in it, he can't get out of it, he can't think of anything else, that would be nice. If he was really obsessed with us, it would be very nice. But there would be no awe, and that would not be a proper, true orientation of knowing where we are compared to him and who we are. So we also need to have that awareness that we are so totally insignificant. And the more we appreciate how insignificant we are, the more inspired we become, touched, that despite this distance, he really cares. Between the two of them, knowing that he really cares deeply and knowing that we are so insignificant, those are the two wings that give our performance of mitzvahs its ability to fly. With one wing, we're somewhat crippled. So we shouldn't forget when we're learning Chassidus, where it tells us how insignificant we are and how perfect God is and how infinite he is and how all-powerful he is and how weak and meaningless we are. That's true. That's awesome. But don't stop there. Finish the picture. Like he says in Tanya, that God abandons the higher worlds, which are more infinite, more divine, more holy. He doesn't identify with them. He creates them and moves on. He identifies himself as the God of Israel. That's how he wants to be known. This is where he lives. That's an amazing thing. And the only explanation is he is truly infinite. He is so infinite that insignificance and significance makes no difference either. So it's true that we are insignificant, and yet it doesn't matter to him. His concern, his devotion, his need for us is real. How can that be? It's not a good question. If your wife really loves you and adores you, don't rock the boat. Don't ask questions. Why would she care about you? You're such a schlemazel. Fine, let it go. Just make sure that the relationship continues. Don't undermine it. So we are absolutely thrilled that an infinite God and an all-powerful God would create us and care about us and identify himself with us. That's called intimacy. And don't question intimacy. Let it be. It's sacred. One of the analogies, or one of the examples that Hasidus brings, is a father playing silly games with his child. Of course, the games are silly. But the more you emphasize how silly they are, the more you have to marvel, then why does he do it? So you can't have only one side of the argument. That is so silly. What are you doing on your hands and knees playing horsey with your kids? You're a grown man. Stop it. And you can focus on how really ridiculous this is, and where's the punchline? So right, it's totally insignificant. And once that game is over, the father will not be a horsey at all. Not in any way at all. He is not a horsey. It's gone. The game is over. Time to grow up and move on. And yet, this very intelligent father is playing horsey. So explain that. But don't paint half a picture and then expect to be able to serve God properly. So yes, the example is a good one because it emphasizes the love of the Father to the Son. Not that it emphasizes the silliness of the game.
For an example, what is the silliness of the game?
The silliness of the game is, I need to sleep, I need to eat, I'm so upset, nobody likes me, somebody made fun of me, my feelings are hurt. This is, and God says, oh yeah, well, that's not nice, but nobody should do that to you. It's the stuff that we will eventually find to be insignificant and silly.
A Torah and mitzvahs and the Jew, that's...
Well, Torah is not silly, Torah is not human, Torah is not created. Of course we're not talking about it. It's like hopefully, every man in his 80s looks back and regrets deeply the things that he got angry about with his children. Because looking back at it, it was so silly. It was so unnecessary. So even human beings will eventually realize that stuff is just silly stuff. It's not even worth the attention or the time and so on. So certainly to God it's all silly, and yet he engages in it. Look at how God lowers himself into this silliness. In the laws of Eruv, being allowed to carry on Shabbos in a courtyard that has many houses, are you allowed to carry from one house to the other or into the courtyard? So in order to be allowed to carry, or even in an apartment building, everybody has their own apartment and then there's the building. So in order to be allowed to carry, you have to unite all the inhabitants and turn it into one big happy family, and then you can carry from one to the other. How do you do that? You all participate in a meal, and in a loaf of bread, and you put that loaf of bread anywhere in the courtyard, and that unites all of the families because they all have a portion in that. So now the question is, a guy is living there. He has not participated in the Eruv, and that ruins it for everybody. Because if there's one exception, then it's not a single unit. So in order for the rest of them to carry, they got to get this guy to participate. So here's what the Torah says. If this guy is not going to be there for Shabbos, does he still have to participate? He has an apartment, but he's not going to be there for Shabbos. He doesn't have to participate. So if he goes away for Shabbos, his non-participation doesn't ruin the Eruv. However, it depends on where he's going. If he's going to his daughter for Shabbos, then he doesn't have to participate because he's not going to be there for Shabbos. But if he's going to his daughter-in-law, he'll be back in the middle of Shabbos. Chances are he'll be back in the middle of Shabbos. So he has to participate, otherwise nobody can carry. I mean, first of all, how insightful and considerate is that of human frailty, of silliness. You know, a guy feels more welcome in his daughter's house than in his daughter-in-law's house. That is so petty. It is so childish. And yet, God's law takes that into account. So, the contrast, an infinite, all-powerful God lowers himself into our petty stuff which, I don't know, might give the impression that it's not petty. So the Torah tells us, Hasidus tells, no, it is very petty. And the fact that he cares about such petty stuff, that's because he's infinite, he's amazing. But appreciate the greatness of it. So when people say, I must be very significant because God doesn't create junk. See, that's not true. If God doesn't create junk, then who did? Because there is definitely junk. So how insignificant is a human being? Completely, totally, so on and so forth. In terms of his existence, in terms of the significance in the relationship with God, infinitely significant. So understand this contrast. Infinitely insignificant people who become infinitely significant because God is amazing. That's the inspiration. That's where v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, you could actually love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, because that is really amazingly inspiring. The greater the contrast, the more awesome the love. So if he has to come an infinite distance in order to have a relationship with us, then that relationship is really incredible. And it is an infinite distance. So get a complete picture.